From KOB4, this is Eye on New Mexico.
Good Sunday morning. The general election is just about 1 week away, and on top of electing a new president, New Mexicans have to pick several new state lawmakers who will have some big issues waiting for them in Santa Fe come January. Thanks for joining us for Eye on New Mexico. I'm Griffin Rushton. We're just about 3 months away from the next 60-day legislative session. It's usually the only time of year when New Mexico state lawmakers are able to propose, debate, and vote on whatever new laws they want. And unlike the previous 30-day session, there's no limits to the types of bills we could see on the table. Of course, we are starting to get an idea which issues will take center stage. Bernalillo County District Attorney Sam Bregman is making it clear he wants state lawmakers to essentially rewrite the Children's Code. Those are New Mexico's juvenile justice laws. They determine how juvenile suspects are charged and sentenced after committing serious crimes. And as DA Bregman pointed out this week, they haven't been seriously updated in decades.
The last time the Children's Code was updated was in the previous century. It was before the invention of the iPhone.
Bregman's office developed a long list of changes they want to see inside the Children's Code. There's 36 altogether, and we're going to explain the big ones in a few moments. But first, the problem that needs a solution.
As the DA, I'm confident in saying overall crime is starting, and this is no victory lap, starting to go in the right direction. Juvenile crime is going in the absolute wrong direction.
And Bernalillo County District Attorney Sam Bregman says the numbers are startling.
I look at 24 kids we've indicted for murder. It's not working.
Bregman took office in January of 2023, and since then, he says his office has received more than 1,400 juvenile cases, including those 24 murders, 42 rapes, 48 armed robberies, and nearly 500 crimes involving guns in some capacity.
From 2022 to 2023, there was a 57% increase in cases referred to our office that involved kids and guns. And this year alone, we already have 119 felony juvenile cases involving a firearm.
Albuquerque police leaders confirmed they're seeing more kids with more guns.
The amount of firearms available to anyone is just increasing since the pandemic, but juveniles is a special category where it has been just increasing nonstop.
And guns aren't the only problem.
The amount of juveniles also involved in auto thefts has skyrocketed for our department. We've caught kids as young as 12 years old, joyriding around in cars, stealing our bait cars, stealing other people's cars during warm-up events or other crime cycles.
DA Bregman believes social media glorification is a big factor here.
Everybody wants to take a picture with a gun, and then they send it out on social media, and they get a few likes, and they say, well, this must make me popular.
But law enforcement leaders also say those youthful offenders know they can get away with serious crimes.
And their perception and the perception of their peers right now is that there are no consequences for crimes committed by juveniles in this community.
And DA Bregman blames that attitude on outdated laws.
We need a children's code that reflects the times that we live in. We did not have the kind of murder rates for juveniles that back in 1993, the last time it was updated. We didn't have these kind of issues. So we've got to come into the times.
Bregman says he's ready to come into the times with those 36 proposed changes we told you about. Now, most of his Children's Code updates are just technical revisions or word changes, but there's a few big ones in there, all aimed at making sure there's proper consequences for youthful offenders while also making sure there's proper guardrails in place.
I am not suggesting for 1 second that we need to lock up juveniles and throw away the key. I'm not. I want to be very clear about that. That is not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is build in some consequences when a juvenile first gets in the criminal justice system, so they learn something about you can't violate certain laws and norms. You can't continue that behavior. Because right now, the consequences are not in the juvenile system until and unless someone dies.
And with that, let's get into Bregman's first big proposed change, expanding the definition of serious youthful offender to include more crimes. Right now, youth suspects can only be charged as adults in first-degree murder cases, the most extreme crime out there. Bregman wants state lawmakers to add second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, rape, armed robbery with a gun, and shooting at or from cars in dwellings that cause great bodily harm or death to that list.
If you commit these awful adult crimes, you should be charged as an adult.
Now, those teen suspects would be sentenced as adults, but for the less violent cases, Bregman wants to extend the jurisdiction of juvenile justice services from 21 to 25 years old. Right now, most teen criminals are released from jail when they turn 21, and this proposed change could keep them in custody for an extra 4 years, and Bregman says it's not to punish them even more.
Expanding that to 25 makes a tremendous amount of sense, and not because we want to necessarily keep everybody into 25, but we need to give these young people the necessary treatment. We need to give them the counseling they need. We need to give them the opportunity to get on the right path, and we need maybe that extra time to make sure they're checking in with us.
Now, one of the more contentious aspects of the Children's Code are its privacy laws, which are important. However, DA Bregman wants state lawmakers to completely remove certain restrictions to increase transparency, and he also wants them to unseal juvenile court records in pretrial detention hearings.
Shouldn't the judge who's making that decision on that 25-year-old about a violent crime he's accused of committing, shouldn't the judge know about his violent juvenile past?
DA Bregman is also proposing getting rid of a detention risk assessment tool and requirements for prosecutors to check in with juvenile probation services before filing petitions to keep teen suspects locked up. And here is a major change when it comes to those gun crimes. Right now, the Children's Code restricts anyone under 19 from possessing a handgun. DA Bregman wants to change that to all firearms, and arguing that handguns not the only weapons that kids have access to these days.
It is not against the law if you're 16 years old to have an assault rifle. That doesn't make any sense to me. If it should be against the law to have a handgun if you're under 19, it should be against the law to have an assault rifle as well.
DA Bregman also wants to increase the penalty for unlawful possession of a firearm from a misdemeanor to a fourth-degree felony. Now, as we mentioned, DA Bregman's team developed a list of 36 total changes to get a handle on juvenile crime in Bernalillo County. Of course, the district attorney's office is not the only agency that deals with the Children's Code. So do the law offices of the public defender, and Chief Public Defender Bennett Bauer has some thoughts on Bregman's plan.
I'm glad that this conversation starts in October because that gives us some time to look at it.
New Mexico's Chief Public Defender Bennett Bauer says there's no denying the pandemic brought major changes to our state's youth.
Schools were shut down. Kids are on their own and there's social media. So those changes, those kind of waves through our society during that time did bring some changes. More guns on the street, more kids with time on their hands, and so we did see a spike in children committing offenses.
But he describes DA Bregman's sweeping set of proposed changes to the Children's Code as a prosecutor's wish list.
So often when we see crime issues, we think that more incarceration, treating children as adults, and or extending sentences is going to address it. And time and again, what we've seen is that is not the thing that actually brings about change in community safety. It's other things. It's education, it's building families, and it's treatment.
Bauer says Bregman's own data supports that attitude as well.
The number of gun crimes charged for juveniles went up pretty significantly in 2023, but that so far this year, they're on pace to go back to the 22 levels or even lower. And so I think that means that certain things will be done that didn't include increasing sentences are working.
Bauer challenges the idea that state lawmakers have not updated the Children's Code since the 90s.
There were changes to the way Native American children are addressed in about 2019. So the legislature does look at and has made some of those changes.
But he agrees there may be room for more.
I think looking at the gun issue could be helpful.
DA Bregman says he wants to expand youth gun restrictions to all firearms, not just handguns. But Bauer suggests the law is written that way for a reason.
New Mexico, especially rural New Mexico, has a culture of hunting. Does that mean children can't hunt with their uncle, with their grandpa? If they forget and leave that gun, that rifle in the trunk of the car or in the back seat, should they be considered a felon? Or should they be detained immediately and have all the consequences, the permanent consequences that come from that?
Bauer has a similar attitude towards Bregman's proposal to allow juvenile records to be unsealed in detention hearings.
We're talking about children accused of crimes, and the vast majority of those children never commit another crime. And if those records, if the records of their cases that happened when they were young are available for the rest of their lives, that can affect all kinds of things to them.
But Bauer knows this is a delicate conversation and does not want to minimize the violent crime issue in Bernalillo County.
To someone who's a victim of crime, any crime is unacceptable. And I understand that. But have we seen this wave that's not going to recede, that we have to change all of these laws and increase incarceration and go against so much science that's been developed about juveniles? For me, the answer to that is no.
The district attorney and the public defender can debate the children's code all day, but it's up to state lawmakers to actually change those laws. And after the break, we're asking Speaker of the House Javier Martinez to weigh in on this. Plus, an old battle over alcohol taxes may face another round in the roundhouse. And could cannabis cops be coming to New Mexico?
I haven't heard one legislator say, no, let's leave the children's code the way it is, it's working. Because it's not working. The children's code is not working. Our children's criminal justice system is not working.
Bernalillo County District Attorney Sam Bregman is clear. He wants New Mexico state lawmakers to rework the children's code. But are state lawmakers willing to make that happen? The changes DA Bregman is proposing would affect the entire state. And we've heard state lawmakers challenge the idea of rewriting state laws to address what are largely considered Albuquerque issues. However, APD leaders say juvenile crime is a statewide issue.
Our detectives work with police in Santa Fe, Roswell, Las Cruces, Taos, Ruidoso all the time in helping solve their crimes or track some of their offenders that are coming through Albuquerque, many of them juveniles. Social media, as the DA pointed out, has allowed that kind of information sharing to expand much quicker. And we see copycat crimes and similar gang and group type activity all over the state.
We asked Speaker of the House Javier Martinez, who does represent a district here in Albuquerque, to weigh in on this children's code conversation.
The reality is that we have to modernize the children's code. It's been well over 20 years since the last time it was touched. And we have to be able to keep up with what's happening today. Unfortunately, there are way too many illegal guns out on the streets. And with social media applications like Telegram and other irresponsible actors, it makes it very easy, unfortunately, for young people to be able to access these types of weapons. And until we get to the bottom of that, I think it's something that we're going to have to continue to deal with. That's why I'm excited to look at the children's code to see how we can modernize it to ensure that we keep all of our community safe, including our young people.
How serious is the juvenile crime problem? How often are you hearing people ask you to do something about this?
Look, one violent offense by a juvenile is one too many, both for the victim and for the perpetrator. Like I said, it is not normal for a 14, 15-year-old to be involved in this type of stuff. And so for me and for our legislature, there is a sense of urgency. There's been a sense of urgency for many years to help improve the system. And like I said, if you look at the track record over the last few years, there's been a lot of work that we've done to move the needle on these issues. And, this doesn't start or end with one legislative session. It doesn't start or end with a press conference. This work continues.
How confident do you think that we'll see at least some type of debate, discussion, bill related to the Children's Code come January?
Well, look, it's a 60-day session, so anything goes. Any bill can be introduced and every bill will be heard and debated and whatnot. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. Young people better, families deserve better. And also, this is not the one silver bullet that will fix things. We're still dealing with housing shortages. We're still dealing with a lack of access to behavioral health and treatment. All of those things are on the table again, and we will continue to work toward building a more inclusive, nurturing community for all of us, but especially our children.
This conversation around the Children's Code is only just getting started, but only time will tell if it actually leads to serious debates in the Roundhouse. District attorneys are not the only folks asking state lawmakers for some big changes. Attorney General Raul Torres is also making an early pitch to legislators. He says our state is not doing a good job of protecting the victims of crime, and he wants to change that. He's especially focused on protecting minors from excessive pretrial interviews. Monica Logroño breaks down the bills he plans on bringing to Santa Fe.
Victims' rights are civil rights just like everyone else. And when a police officer abuses someone on the street or violates the 4th or 5th Amendment, they have a right to take that officer to court. Well, why would we treat victims any differently?
State Attorney General Raul Torres is introducing 2 bills for the 2025 legislative session. The first involves protecting minor and adult victims of crime from excessive pretrial interviews, which Torres says can re-traumatize victims.
We're one of only a handful of states in the country that permit an adult to interrogate a child about a traumatic sexual assault or physical or an incident involving child abuse.
That bill is sponsored by Representative Tara Jaramillo.
Our proposed bill would expand protections for children and sexual assault victims involved in criminal proceedings by preventing child victims or witnesses from being forced to give a pretrial statement or interview.
Adult victims would also be allowed to refuse or limit those interviews. The bill would also require courts to reject repetitive questioning. The second bill aims to update the Victims of Crime Act.
What we experienced was pathetic. A complete disregard for victims. This was not justice. In fact, this was abuse.
Tony Ronga shared what his family went through after the teacher who sexually assaulted his daughter was released years early from probation without telling the victims.
In the end, an admitted sexual offender was offered more respect and decency by the court than the victims themselves. Then he was released from his consequences earlier than was initially promised.
Ronga explained his frustration and call for change.
It's critical that New Mexicans require accountability for and enforcement of the Victims' Rights Act. Survivors of these deeply traumatic offenses deserve justice.
The new bill would allow victims like Ronga's daughter to sue if they aren't told about a defendant's release.
It requires that victims be given notice of scheduled proceedings at least 7 days in advance, so they can make arrangements to participate if they want.
That was Monica Logroño reporting. That second bill also adds human trafficking and battery of a healthcare worker to the list of offenses covered by the Victims of Crime Act. Still to come, another round of bills raising New Mexico's alcohol taxes are heading to the Roundhouse. We'll tell you how much more you could be paying per drink. Some battles never die in the Roundhouse, and it appears the state lawmakers working to raise New Mexico's alcohol taxes are ready for another round come January. You may remember there were 2 competing proposals during the 30-day session earlier this year, both working to raise New Mexico's alcohol taxes, but in 2 very different ways. One would raise the current taxes to match inflation, and those taxes are paid by alcohol distributors, while the other proposal would establish a retail tax, which you would would pay when you purchase alcohol. Democratic State Senator Antoinette Cedillo-Lopez is behind that first proposal. During an interim committee hearing, she revealed her new version of her proposal would also add a temporary 20-cent public health investment per drink to help combat an alcohol-fueled public health crisis. That temporary fee would only go away after the rate of alcohol-related deaths in New Mexico significantly drops.
We think that if we have the whole state focusing on this, that if we could accomplish this, we would have moved the needle on so many indicators in New Mexico, including health outcomes, education outcomes, crime outcomes. And so that's why we've kind of structured it a little bit differently.
The other proposal from Democratic State Rep Michaela Lara Cadena would completely redo how our state taxes alcohol, imposing a new 3% retail tax on all purchases. That means more expensive drinks will have higher taxes and vice versa.
By making this tax policy reflect the cost of the product sold, those that are buying top shelf alcohol will pay top shelf taxes. And those that I imagine are potentially more likely to be navigating dependency, poverty, trauma, and probably alcoholism as a disease would not be facing the massive tax increases, but potentially could be positively impacted by our new ideas about alcohol revenues.
Both proposals are meant to decrease alcohol consumption by increasing the price, and both bills do include mechanisms to divert the extra tax revenue into alcohol harm alleviations funds. Our state lawmakers will also be talking about cannabis in the upcoming legislative session. The state agency in charge of regulating the budding industry is planning to ask for an extra $4 million, and it's all to weed out those bad actors.
You can't foresee the future. If we could, we'd all be in better shape, right?
With more than $1.3 billion in sales and more than 3,000 individual licenses awarded in just 2.5 years, New Mexico's cannabis industry is growing like weeds. But any gardener will tell you some weeds are worse than others.
I know some of the businesses are concerned about the illicit market coming in, taken away from the legalized business.
Clay Bailey is the new superintendent of the state's regulation and licensing department, and he says his team of cannabis compliance officers is stretched thin.
We got 13, including the manager, that goes out, does inspections. It's a heck of a lift. It's tough, and that's one reason we're asking for an additional 10 inspectors.
Bailey says he's planning to ask state lawmakers for nearly $2 million to pay for those new inspectors and the critical work they do every day.
This is a product that people consume, some of it medical, some of it recreational. We need to be sure they're doing it right, that they're following the rules, that, there's no pesticides, mold, bugs, all kinds of things that go along with this. But it's a life safety issue is why we do it.
Since January of 2023, those compliance officers performed 3,200 inspections across the state, finding more than 9,000 violations and issuing 30 enforcement actions.
There's a lot of illicit grows, and the illicit grows, they're the ones that are having 10, 20, 30, 40,000 plants or more. They'll put up 150 hoop houses overnight. They have no license, no business being in the business. They don't care how they do it.
Right now, the Cannabis Control Division only has administrative authority. Law enforcement has to deal with those illicit operations, and they're busy. So Bailey is planning to ask state lawmakers to give his department some extra power.
If we get the law enforcement authority, we can go out and handle the seizure, we can handle the embargo, we can handle the destruction, we can handle the search warrants, we can handle a lot of stuff that takes it off their plate.
Bailey is requesting another $1 million to pay for 7 special agents to handle all those enforcement operations, a unit that already exists in other cannabis states like Colorado. He's also requesting another $1 million for new equipment for all these new employees.
It's a pressing matter, and the longer we wait, the bigger it's going to get and the more problematic it's going to be.
The 60-day legislative session is scheduled to begin on January 21st, and our team will be at the Roundhouse bringing you coverage from gavel to gavel. Thanks for watching this morning. We'll be back next Sunday with another Eye on New Mexico.